Hello, this is Mark Sabatella from Outside Shore Music. In this video, I want to talk about a particular type of structure for a melody called a sentence. And in another video, I talked about the period structure, which is one type of structure that has a specific name in music theory. The sentence is the other one that gets a name sometimes. And a sentence structure is one in which you have a motif. I'm using here the Clementi Sonatina in C major, which is really the first piece of classical music I heard growing up when our family first got a piano, and my mother would sit down and play this piece. So one of the very first classical melodies I ever heard, and it uses this structure. So we have this motif. The next measure repeats the same motif, but with a little variation. With, in this case, the octave jump at the end. Sometimes that might be the variation, other times it might be a sequence, like, where you're changing the pitches. It's usually some sort of pitch change, whether it's all the pitches moved up a step, or in this case, one of them moved up an octave. So we have a motif, and then a repetition of that motif with a little variation. Then we have an answering phrase, which is the same length as the two motifs together. That is what is really typical. If your original motif is one measure, the repetition is one measure, so total, that's two measures of the original motif, then we'll expect the kind of extension to it to also be two measures. So, super common type of pattern. In fact, it's so common that we're going to see it again. The next thing we see here, if I start on this measure, that's a two-measure motif followed by the same motif transposed up a step. So we get a motif, then we get the repetition of the motif up a step, followed, and so that's now a two-measure motif repeated, so that's four measures total. The next four measures are the answering phrase. So we see that this piece has a very short sentence at the beginning with a one-measure motif, making the entire sentence four measures long. And then later on, we have a two-measure motif that turns it into basically an eight-measure phrase, right? A two-measure motif there. The repetition of it is two measures, and then the answering phrase is four. So the whole sentence ends up being 8 bars. So there you have it. It's a really common type of structure where you have a motif, you repeat it with a little variation, and then you have some sort of answering phrase. In many cases, that answering phrase will start off kind of maybe trying to fool you into thinking it's going to be a third statement of the motif, but then it takes a left turn. So in this second one we had here, that motif that starts off with a bunch of eighth notes, the answering phrase starts off, okay, it's a bunch of eighth notes going up, kind of sort of reminds you of the original motif, but not really, because it's arpeggiating up instead of a scale up. Sometimes it might actually start off with a little bit of a scale, but then usually takes a left turn somewhere, so that the answering phrase relates to the motif, but isn't just a literal repetition or simple variation of it, like we've had here. So there you have it. That is what a sentence structure is in a melody.